Hey everyone, Steve the Future here, and today we're going to do a little bit of a different video, and I think the title already says what this video is going to be about, so I'm not going to beat around the bush too much. This is going to be a little bit of a hardware, software discussion thing, because this is always the thing that gets people rallied up and commenting and saying all sorts of nasty stuff. But hey, that's the internet for you. So this video was inspired by a post made in a synthwave producer group, and because this is a private group I'm going to blur out the name and stuff, but basically it boils down to, hey, I'm new to making music, I don't have a big budget, is there any advantage to using hardware synthesizers? But slightly longer than that, you can read the post on the screen. Anyways. So I was going to assume this was going to be quite the shit show, because this is one of those questions when you ask it, people get really upset, and actually the comments were very reasonable. So that was a nice surprise. Every so often the internet is a wholesome place and people actually give good advice, but I felt like I could just add a little bit from my perspective, as being a complete noob as well, to use the words from this person. And I think I could share a little bit of my experience in this journey and hopefully help someone else with my experience. I mean, that's the entire point of this channel. This is me going down a rabbit hole, exploring things, and hopefully my knowledge will help other people prevent doing stupid things. I think that's a pretty good summary of this channel. Anyways, let's carry on. So I originally wanted to shoot this at the attic, then I realized it's a bit of a mess. Actually, it's as you can see in this footage, it's a pretty big mess. Yeah. So, and there's no sound card connected to my PC there right now. So that was going to make things harder. And also shooting videos about hardware and talking about videos, they just take up a lot of time to do because you have to set up lighting, blah blah blah. So we're going to stick to a very boring screen video. It's just what it is. I'll pop in some images, but you can pretty much alt tab this and do your stuff while I present my points and reasoning. So, you are new to making music and you are not on a big budget. Should you invest into hardware? Short answer, no, don't. Just don't do it. And there are several reasons why not to do it. First off, hardware is very expensive. That's a pretty good reason to not do it, and you could better invest it in a powerful PC. Music software, which is not going to be outdated very soon. Most software is also a lot more powerful than the hardware you can get, so that's a big plus. It takes up a hell of a lot less space, which is very nice. There is no maintenance when it comes to software, which is also a very big plus. And another added advantage is that you can actually do everything on your PC. Which might sound like a stupid advantage, but it's actually pretty nice. So for instance, this project I have here, I decided it would be fun to use my D50 to use some bass patches, because the D50 has some pretty nice bass patches. So I recorded some MIDI, bounced it to the D50, and recorded that into my DAW. So here we have. Now you might think that's not really bass. Yeah, that's because this is just one layer in a stack. But as you might notice, there are only two pieces here of this bass line, because I didn't originally record the other parts, and now if I want to record these parts in, I would have to do the entire ordeal again. Now I'm a little bit at a disadvantage because I don't currently have a workplace where I have my synths set up, but still you can imagine every time you want to change a part, or you want to change maybe a sound, or maybe you want to edit a sound a little bit or play around with it, you would have to bounce the MIDI through your synthesizer into your DAW and re-record pretty much the entire song, which is a huge headache. Where if you use a plugin, you can just, I don't know, here's a plugin. You can just open it up, here we go, and you can just click the button, there we go, different preset, easy. Or you can take this preset and you can just mess it up, whatever you want, and it's done. So on hardware, you would have to go into your synth, probably have to menu dive a little bit, mess around with it to get these quick changes done. So that's one point towards using a DAW. It's just easier. Also, you don't have to mess with big interfaces. So for my rather small collection of synthesizers I have right now, I have the D50, the JDXA, System 1, JV1080, JV8080, which is a really weird lineup. I know, it's just what came on my path and was very cheap to get, so here we are. But that's already like 5 synths times 2 inputs, because you want to have some stereo. That's already 10 inputs on your interface, or you would need a mixer. Then there is stuff like ground loops, there is cables you have to manage, there is noise, there is interface noise, there is shielding, all sorts of horrible things to have to deal with. Trust me, especially ground hum can be a serious pain in the ass to get rid of. And if you're interested in using older synthesizers, because most people going into synthwave would be interested in going with older synthesizers like the DX7, D50 for instance, like I have, maybe some Korg stuff, MS-20, all these synthesizers, all these older synthesizers, you are running the risk that a power supply will die. Things can short out. Many of these have issues with keys. It's pretty common. Famous example would be with the D50s, the red glue problem, where the glue of the key dampening will deteriorate, is the right word, I think. So that's all sorts of stuff you have to mess around with hardware that you will never have to deal with in software. Bonus advantages of software: much easier to program, actually, especially when you're talking digital synthesizers. I will touch on subtractive synthesizers in a little bit, so don't get mad just quite yet. But when we're talking about digital synthesizers, all digital synthesizers require a ton of menu diving. That's just how it works. Old models have this much worse than newer models, of course. Some new synthesizers actually have touchscreens, which is kind of nice. But still, if you're going down the old synthesizer route, be prepared to do a lot of diving, which isn't very interesting to do, honestly, and it's very frustrating. Let alone editing patches on the small little LCD screens like the JV series. It's a whole different world to work in. It's not very inspiring or very relaxing to do. Meanwhile, if you would get a JV1080, for instance, on the Roland Cloud, you would get a nice graphical interface with all the controls easily at hand. Now, people could say, yeah, but you could buy the special programmer for the JV. They are actually more expensive than the JV units, so that's even more expense. Also, these units work with sysx programming, and many of the parameters can't be changed while the sounds are running, so very often you can't just live filter sweep or do stuff like that, where the software will allow you to do this stuff. Same goes for the D50. I think this would be an excellent time to say that Roland has pretty much the worst website in the world. So I'm going to have to look up a picture of the D50 editing interface, so jump cut, and there we go, found it. So yeah, with the software version you get all these nice little sliders and stuff, where if you are using the actual D50 you will have to press about 1 million buttons to go through parameters, and then you have to press 1 million more buttons to edit the parameters. It's very annoying, very not visual, and even though it works and it's sort of cool to have that 80s experience when you're making music, it's mostly just a huge headache to have to deal with this stuff. Also no DAW automation, of course, when you're using a synthesizer, hardware synthesizer I should say, so that's another strike towards hardware. If you want to do DAW or MIDI-based, CC-based automations with a hardware synthesizer, you would actually have to re-record the entire part to get the CC automations in your audio files. I think that's the reason many people use software effects on a lot of hardware synthesizers, just because that's at least one less thing to have to deal with. So yeah, that's another thing you have to think about. If you want to go the hardware route, it's usually harder to program, especially digital synths. Now, when we're talking about subtractive synthesizers, there's a little bit of nuance there. I think, well, no, let's start off with the obvious problem with a lot of synthesizers that are from the subtractive model. That's patches. So every time you use a synthesizer, a hardware synthesizer, you would have to make sure you correctly denote which patch you used. You'll have to deal with limited storage space of a lot of synthesizers, so quite often you'll have to patch manage a lot. If you want to go back and forth between projects, you'll have to manage your patches again. So there's no easy flipping between projects, so that's another strike towards hardware. And with a lot of analog synths, especially the big coveted units, they quite often don't even have memory. So it's basically you are going to have to record the entire part for the entire song in one go, or not switch projects in between, because that one synthesizer will be patched for that one song. And if you mess around with it and you play a new line, it will no longer line up with the rest of the song, and that's just one more headache to deal with. That being said though, I would definitely recommend, if you have the means, to buy a subtractive synthesizer. And it doesn't have to be an analog synthesizer. My first subtractive synthesizer was the System 1, which I still highly recommend, but it's not the cheapest one in the bunch. You can also go for a Arturia, for instance. They're pretty cheap. Or buy a Behringer, I guess. I'm not a big fan of Behringer. But that's not because they're synths or anything, it's just that they are kind of dicks. So yeah, you can watch Ben Jordan's video about Behringer. Make up your mind if you want to deal with that company or not. But for me, Behringer is sort of out of the question due to their business practices. But there's a huge second-hand market, and if you can get your hands on a subtractive synthesizer, it doesn't have to be complex. I think it will greatly help you with understanding the concepts, and then you can take those concepts into your DAW, and you can use that synthesizer just for noodling when you don't feel like booting up your DAW, which is a nice little bonus. I often have my System 1 sitting on my desk, and when I'm just watching something, I'll have it on, and I'll just play around with it a little bit in the background just to have some extra things to do. Now, the one obvious thing people will probably be typing in the comments right now is but what about the characteristic analog sound of these filters and blah blah blah? I get that a lot of people are very attached to these synthesizers and their legacy, but I don't think anyone listening to any song ever has thought, this is a good song, but it would have been better with a real analog synthesizer. I am 100% convinced no one in the history of mankind has ever thought to himself, this is a terrible song, because they used a plugin instead of a Moog, just to name something. And I know that Moog fans are very sensitive to this stuff, so go ahead, be mad in the comments. Yes, a Moog emulation will not sound the exact same as a Moog, of course not. But once you put it into a song, you publish it on, I don't know, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, whatever, absolutely no one will ever notice. Like, this stuff is not like drum sampling or something where there's a very distinct difference between having a real drummer or programmed drums. This is just such tiny, small little details that you will only notice when you are engineering your own song or you are playing your own instrument, and there's no one in the world that will care about it except yourself. So if that's something you care about a lot, I guess hardware is the only route to go. But I would say, in answer to this question, if you are a new player and you want to get into music making, invest your money in a good and stable PC, invest your money into a simple interface, so Scarlett, for instance, very popular, or something like the Roland Rubix line. Invest your money into a DAW, and I would say if you're starting out, just get Reaper for $60. That's probably the best value you are going to get. And after that, invest your money into a few not too expensive VSTs. Now, this is controversial, of course, but I think if you're really just starting out, you're not 100% sure if this is the route to go, it's probably a bad move to buy Complete or something. You're probably best off to either buy some cheaper software synths, and there's a lot of them out there, so plenty of choice. Or you can get like a subscription. For instance, Roland Cloud is a subscription, but there's also pay-to-own models for the Arturia stuff, for instance. So you can at least give it a shot before you dedicate hundreds of dollars to it and eventually maybe not continue a hobby, which would be a waste of money if you had bought all this software. Now you can sell software, but really the resale value is pretty terrible. I guess that's a point for hardware. Slightly better resale value. I think that pretty much covers the entire subject for me. That's how I view these things. Now, I'm no triple platinum producer or anything. I'm just a guy in his, well, technically a bedroom, making music for the fun of it and messing with this software for the fun of it. I'm pretty sure that there's plenty of producers that will agree with me. There are plenty that will disagree with me. Let's just try to keep this a little bit civil and let me know what you think. Alright, that's it for this video. More VST stuff coming soon, TM. And for now, have a great day.